Picture a world where courage was measured in steel, where battles were won not with gunfire but with the clash of swords, the weight of armor, and the fire of human will. In medieval times, war wasn't just a fight, it was a brutal dance of survival, strategy and sacrifice, where every swing of a blade carried the hopes of a kingdom or the grief of a family. In the rugged hills of the kingdom of Varhold in 1348, where the scars of the plague still bled, a young squire, a seasoned knight, and a healer's apprentice are bound by a looming battle that will test their hearts and reshape their world. This is their story, a tapestry of blood and bravery, and it's not what you think. Varhold was a kingdom of stone and shadow, its borders frayed by years of war with the neighbouring duchy of Brighthaven. The plague had left both lands weakened, their fields fallow, their people haunted, but pride and power drove them to clash. King Edric, Varhold's ruler, was a man of iron will, his throne built on the loyalty of knights like Sir Alric, a grizzled warrior whose scars told tales of battles won and lost. Alric was Varhold's shield, his long sword a symbol of duty, but his heart was heavy with the cost of war. Friends buried, villages burned. He trained his squire Callan, a wiry boy of 16 whose dreams of knighthood were tempered by the fear in his green eyes. In the village below the castle lived Soren, a healer's apprentice, whose hands were stained with herbs, his quiet strength a contrast to the clamour of war. Alric stood on the castle ramparts, his chainmail glinting in the dawn, watching the horizon where Brighthaven's banners would soon rise. He'd fought in a dozen battles, each a chaos of steel and screams, where strategy was as vital as strength. Medieval battles weren't the wild melees of legend, they were planned with formations like the shield wall, where men locked shields to face cavalry charges, or the wedge, a spearhead of knights to break enemy lines. Alric knew the cost of a single mistake, a gap in the line, a misjudged flank, and he bore the weight of every man he'd led to death. "War's no game, boy," he told Callan, his voice rough as he adjusted the squire's ill-fitting armor. "It's a debt you pay in blood." Callan nodded, his hands trembling, his dreams of glory fading under the reality of war. Callan was no warrior, not yet. He'd grown up in Varhold's fields, his father a farmer, lost to the plague, his mother praying for his return. He'd begged to serve Alric, his eyes bright with tales of knights, but the weight of a sword was heavier than he'd imagined. Training was brutal, hours of sparring with wooden blades, learning to parry and thrust, to move in armor that chafed his skin. Alric taught him the longbow, a weapon that could pierce mail from 100 yards, and the mace, a brutal tool for close combat. But Callan's heart was his strength. He cared for the other squires, bandaging their bruises, sharing his meager bread. "You've got to be more than a blade," Alric told him, his eyes softening. Callan clung to those words, his fear a constant shadow, but his will unbroken. Soren, the healer's apprentice, was a quiet force in Varhold's chaos. He worked under Mistress Alira, a healer whose knowledge of herbs and wounds was legendary. Soren's hands were gentle, his eyes sharp, catching details others missed. A soldier's limp, a fever's flush. He'd seen the aftermath of battles, men carried to Alira's tent with gashed limbs and broken spirits. Medieval warfare was a butcher's trade. Swords cleaved flesh, axes crushed bone, and arrows rained like death. Soren learned to stitch wounds, to set bones, to ease pain with willow bark and poppy. But he also saw the cost beyond the body, nights haunted by guilt, families torn by loss. He'd met Callan at the castle, bringing salves for the squires, and the boy's kindness touched him. "You're braver than most," Soren told him, his voice soft. Callan blushed, his fear easing under Soren's gaze. The war with Brighthaven was no grand crusade. It was a feud over a strip of borderland, rich with mines, that neither king would yield. Edric called his banners, summoning knights and levies, men armed with spears and courage but little else. Alric led the preparations, his voice barking orders as archers practiced, and footmen drilled in the shield wall. He knew Brighthaven's strength, cavalry, heavy with lances, and a commander, Lord Rorik, whose cunning had broken Varhold's lines before. Alric planned a defence on the hills of Thornridge, where the terrain favoured Varhold's archers. "We hold the high ground," he told his men, his eyes hard. "We bleed them before they reach us." But his heart was heavy, every plan carried a cost, and he'd seen too many die. Callan's training intensified, his body aching from sparring, his mind racing with Alric's lessons. He learned to read the battlefield, watch the banners, spot the flank, listen for the horn's call. But fear gnawed at him, dreams of blood and screams waking him at night. He'd slip to the healer's tent, seeking Soren's calm. Soren would brew tea, his hands steady, his stories of healing a balm. "You're not just fighting for Edric," Soren told him one night, his eyes warm. "You're fighting for the ones who wait for you." Callan thought of his mother, her prayers a lifeline, and nodded, his heart steadier. Their bond grew, a quiet strength in the shadow of war. Soren's work was relentless, the healer's tent a haven for the wounded and weary. Elira taught him to prioritize, save the ones you can, ease the ones you can't. He learned the brutal math of battle, men lost to infection, to shock, to despair. But Soren's heart was his weapon. He'd sit with dying soldiers, holding their hands, whispering their names to the stars. He saw Alric's scars, not just on his body, but in his eyes, and brought him salves, his voice soft. "You carry too much," Soren said, his hands gentle. Alric's gruff laugh hid his gratitude, but he began seeking Soren's tent, his stories of battles, a weight shared. Soren listened, his heart heavy, but his resolve firm, knowing every life he saved was a defiance of war's cruelty. The battle loomed, Brighthaven's scouts spotted at Thornridge's edge. Alric gathered his men, his voice steady, but his heart racing. He placed archers on the hills, their longbows ready, and footmen in a shield wall, their spears a forest. Callan, assigned to carry Alric's banner, felt the weight of eyes on him. Squires, knights, levies, all bound by fear and hope. He clutched the banner, its blue and gold a beacon, and thought of Soren's words. "For the ones who wait," he whispered, his voice trembling but sure. Soren, in the healer's tent below, prepared with Elira, their hands mixing salves, their eyes on the horizon. The village held its breath, mothers like Callan's praying, their hands clutching rosaries, their hearts with the men on the hill. The battle began at dawn, Brighthaven's cavalry charging, their lances gleaming. Alric's archers loosed arrows, a rain of death that broke the charge, horses screaming, men falling. The shield wall held, spears thrusting, but Rorik's infantry pressed, their axes hacking. Callan stood firm, his banner high, his heart pounding as Alric roared commands, his sword a blur. The hills were a chaos of steel and blood, men falling, their cries a storm. Soren and Elira worked below, their tent filling with the wounded, their hands bloody, but steady. Callan saw a knight fall, his armor pierced, and ran to drag him to safety, his fear swallowed by duty. Alric's eyes met his, a nod of pride amidst the chaos. The battle turned when Rorik's flank broke, Alric's wedge driving through, his knights a spearhead of steel. But the cost was brutal, levies fell, their spears broken, their families waiting in vain. Callan's banner wavered, an arrow grazing his arm, but he held it high, his voice shouting Alric's name. Soren, seeing the wounded flood in, worked faster, his hands stitching, his heart breaking for every man lost. A squire, Callan's friend, died in his arms, his name whispered to the stars. Alric fought on, his sword heavy with blood, his mind on the men he couldn't save. The battle ended with Brighthaven's retreat, their banners fading, but Varhold's victory was a hollow thing, the hills littered with the dead. In the aftermath, Thornwick mourned, its lanes filled with the cries of widows and orphans. Alric, his armor dented, walked among the wounded, his eyes haunted. Callan, his arm bandaged, helped Soren, his hands trembling, but his heart full. Soren stitched and soothed, his voice a balm for the broken. The village gathered, their hands linked, their prayers a mix of grief and gratitude. Alric, Callan, and Soren stood together, their bond forged in blood and care, their story a thread in Varhold's tapestry. The war wasn't over, Brighthaven would return, and Baldwin's taxes loomed, but their fight was a spark, a tale of steel and sacrifice that would carry Thornwick forward, its heart beating in every swing of a sword, every stitch of a wound. The hills of Thornridge were silent now, the blood-soaked earth hidden beneath a fresh layer of snow. But the scars of battle lingered in Varhold's heart. Ulrich, Callan and Soren stood amidst the wreckage of their victory, their hands stained with the cost of survival. The clash with Brighthaven had broken their enemy's advance, but the price was steep. Levies buried in shallow graves, squires mourning friends, and a village weeping for sons who'd never return. King Edric's banner flew high, but whispers of Brighthaven's regrouping stirred fear. Ulrich's sword arm ached, Callan's banner hand trembled, and Soren's healer's heart broke for every life he couldn't save. Thornwick was a fragile beacon, its people bound by grief and grit, and the story of their fight was far from over, its next chapter a crucible of courage and cunning. Ulrich walked the castle ramparts, his chainmail heavy, his eyes scanning the horizon for Brighthaven's return. The battle had been won through strategy, archers on the hills, the shield wall's stubborn hold, but he knew Rarik, Brighthaven's commander, was no fool. Scouts reported Rarik's men fortifying a river crossing, their lances and longbows ready for another strike. Ulrich gathered his knights, his voice rough but steady. "We bled them once, but they'll come harder," he said, his scarred hands tracing a map of the borderlands. He planned a new defense, using Varhold's forests to hide archers, their volleys a surprise to break cavalry charges. But his heart was heavy. Every plan meant more names to carve on stones, more widows in Thornwick's lanes. Callan, still shaken from the battle, carried Ulrich's banner with a new weight. The arrow that grazed his arm had left a scar, a reminder of how close death had come. Training was relentless. Ulrich pushed him harder, teaching him to wield a mace, its blunt force a counter to armored knights. Callan's body ached, but his spirit grew, forged in the fire of Thornridge. He'd saved a knight, dragging him to safety, and Ulrich's nod of pride was a treasure he held close. At night he'd slip to Soren's tent, his voice low. "I'm not sure I'm brave enough," he admitted, his green eyes shadowed. Soren, mixing salves, met his gaze. "Bravery's not the absence of fear," he said, his hands steady. "It's carrying on despite it." Callan nodded, his heart steadier, their bond a lifeline in the chaos. Soren's tent was a sanctuary, its air thick with the scent of herbs and blood. Mistress Alira's lessons were a constant hum. Stitch fast, prioritize the living, ease the dying. Soren's hands moved with precision, but his heart bore the weight of every lost life. The squire who died in his arms haunted him, his name whispered to the stars each night. He worked with Alira to prepare for the next battle, stockpiling bandages, brewing teas of willow bark and chamomile. The village women helped, their hands trembling but eager, learning to bind wounds. One, a widow named Marza, became Soren's shadow, her grief for her son, a fuel for her care. "You give them hope," she told him, her voice soft. Soren's eyes welled but he smiled. "We give it together," he said, his hands guiding hers. Sorenwick was a village on edge, its people mourning but defiant. The battle had united them, but Brighthaven's threat loomed, and King Edric's demands grew harsher. He called for more levies, stripping the village of men, leaving women and children to tend fields. Ulrich, torn between duty and compassion, argued with Edric's steward, a cold man named Halric. "We can't bleed them dry," Ulrich said, his voice sharp. Halric's sneer was a blade. "They're serfs, not knights," he said. Ulrich's fists clenched, but he held his tongue, knowing a wrong word could cost lives. He began training the levies himself, teaching them to hold a spear, to lock shields, his gruff voice hiding his care. Callan's mother, Aelith, was a quiet force in the village, her prayers a thread that held Thornwick together. She'd lost her husband to the plague, and Callan's role as squire was both her pride and her terror. She'd visit Soren's tent, bringing bread baked from meager flour, her hands worn from work. "Keep him safe," she told Soren, her voice trembling. Soren nodded, his heart heavy. "He's stronger than you know," he said, his eyes kind. Aelith's prayers grew fiercer, her rosary, a lifeline, and she began organizing the women, teaching them to make bandages, to boil water, to fight in their own way. Her courage inspired Callan, who carried her love like armor, his banner a promise to return. A new figure emerged in Varhold, a scout named Lyra, a woman whose sharp eyes and quick feet had survived Brighthaven's raids. She came to Thornwick, her cloak patched, her voice low with tales of Rorik's plans. A siege to starve Varhold, cutting off its grain. Alric welcomed her, his trust hard-earned but given when she mapped Rorik's camps with precision. "They'll hit the river first," she said, her finger tracing a ford. Alric nodded, his mind racing. He planned a counter, archers in the trees, knights hidden in the fog, a trap to break Rorik's advance. Lyra joined Callan's training, teaching him to move silently, her laughter a rare light. "You're no knight yet," she teased, her eyes twinkling. Callan's blush was a spark, his fear easing under her guidance. The threat of siege stirred Thornwick's fear. Halric's demands grew crueler, seizing grain for the castle, leaving the village hungry. Alric, furious, confronted him, his voice a growl. "You'll starve the men who fight for you," he said. Halric's laugh was cold, but Alric's defiance rallied the levies, their spears a forest of resolve. Soren and Mar worked harder, their tent a hub of care, their hands stitching wounds from training mishaps. Illyra taught them to make poultices, her voice calm but urgent. "The next battle's coming," she said, her eyes sharp. Soren nodded, his heart heavy, but his hands steady, knowing every salve was a defiance of death. Callan's training took a new turn. Alric taught him the crossbow, its bolts a match for Brighthaven's mail. The weapon was heavy, its crank slow, but Callan's aim was true, his fear giving way to focus. He began teaching other squires, his voice steady, his banner a symbol of their unity. One squire, a boy named Tom, became his friend, his quick wit a mirror of Callan's heart. Tom's laughter eased the camp's tension, but his eyes held fear, his brother lost at Thornridge. Callan shared his bread, his words a comfort. "We'll face it together," he said, his hand on Tom's shoulder. Their bond was a spark, a promise to survive. Lyra's scouts brought grim news. Rorik's army was massing, their numbers bolstered by mercenaries, their lances a forest of death. Alric adjusted his plans, using Lyra's knowledge to fortify the river ford. He placed stakes to slow cavalry, archers to rain arrows, and knights to hold the line. But the villagers' hunger was a growing threat. Halric's seizures left children crying, their bellies empty. Alric Lith rallied the women, hiding grain in secret caches, their hands quick despite their fear. Soren helped, his tent a refuge for the starving, his teas easing their pain. Mara's courage grew, her hands bandaging and baking, her grief a fuel. "We're not just waiting," she said, her voice fierce. Soren nodded, his heart full, their work a rebellion against despair. A new challenge emerged, a traitor in Varhold's ranks, a knight named Gavin, who'd taken Brighthaven's coin. Gavin leaked Alric's plans, his whispers reaching Rorik. Lyra caught him, her sharp eyes spotting his meetings with a Brighthaven scout. She told Alric, her voice low. "He's selling us out," she said, her hand on her dagger. Alric's face darkened, but he acted swiftly, confronting Gavin in the castle hall. "You betray your own," he growled, his sword drawn. Gavin's smirk was cold, but the knights rallied to Alric, their loyalty a wall. Gavin was bound, his treason exposed, but the damage was done. Rorik knew the ford's defenses. Alric reworked his plan, his mind racing, his heart heavy, with the cost of trust. The village prepared, their hands busy, their spirits fierce. Alric Lith's women wove nets to slow cavalry, their needles flashing. Soren and Mara stocked the tent, their salves a lifeline. Callan and Tom trained, their crossbows ready, their banners high. Lyra scouted, her feet silent, her eyes sharp. Alric drilled the levies, his voice a beacon, his sword a promise. Illyra taught the women to set bones, her hands guiding theirs. The fever lingered, claiming a levy's wife, but Soren's care saved others, his heart breaking, but his hands steady. Thornwick was a crucible, its people forged in fire, their fight a song of steel and sacrifice. As Brighthaven's banners rose, Alric Callan, Soren Lyra, Mara, Alric Lith's Tom, and Illyra stood together, their bond a shield against the coming storm. The river ford was their battleground, its waters a mirror of their resolve. Alric's archers waited, their bows taut. Callan's banner flew, his heart pounding, but his hands sure. Soren's tent was ready, its herbs a defiance of death. Lyra's scouts moved, their whispers a weapon. The village prayed, their hands linked, their hearts with the men on the ford. The battle was coming, and their story was a thread in Varhold's tapestry, a tale of courage and care, weaving toward it. The snow-laden air of Valhall was thick with the weight of an approaching storm, not just of winter, but of war. The river Ford, its waters churning beneath a thin crust of ice, was the stage for a battle that could break the kingdom. Alric, Callan, Soren, Lyra, Mara, Aelith, Tom, and Alira stood as the heart of Thornwick's defiance, their hands ready, their spirits forged in the crucible of loss and courage. Brighthaven's banners loomed closer, their army bolstered by mercenaries, their lances a forest of steel under Lord Rurik's cunning command. Gavin's betrayal had exposed Alric's plans, forcing a desperate shift in strategy, while Halric's greed starved the village, and the fever's shadow lingered. Their story was a tapestry of steel, sacrifice and stubborn hope, its threads taut with the tension of a kingdom on the brink, ready to unravel or ignite with the dawn. Alric stood at the ford's edge, his chainmail glinting in the pale light, his scarred hands gripping a map redrawn after Gavin's treason. Rurik's knowledge of the defences meant Brighthaven would strike hard, likely crossing the ford at night to avoid the archers. Alric adjusted his plan, hiding spearmen in the river's reeds, their shields low, their eyes sharp. He placed Lyra's scouts in the trees, their signals a whisper of warning, and positioned archers on the cliffs, their longbows a silent threat. "We don't just hold," he told his knights, his voice rough but steady. "We outsmart them." His heart was heavy, every order was a gamble, every man a name he'd carry. He looked at Callan, the boy's banner trembling but high, and saw a spark of the knight he'd become. "Stay close," Alric said, his gruff tone hiding his pride. Callan's hands shook as he clutched the banner, its blue and gold a beacon in the snow. The battle at Thornridge had scarred him, the memory of blood and screams a weight he couldn't shake. Alric's training was relentless, hours with the crossbow, its bolts heavy in his hands, and drills with the shield, its weight a test of his strength. But Callan's heart was his armor. He shared his rations with Tom, his fellow squire, and carried water for the levies, his kindness a light in their fear. At night, he sought Soren's tent, his voice low. "What if I falter?" he asked, his green eyes shadowed. Soren, grinding herbs, met his gaze. "You won't," he said, his voice calm. "You're fighting for more than yourself." Callan thought of Aelith, his mother's prayers a shield, and nodded, his fear a fire he'd learned to wield. Soren's tent was a haven amidst the chaos, its air thick with the tang of willow bark and blood. Alira's lessons were a lifeline: stitch fast, save the living, honor the dying. Soren's hands moved with precision, but each wound he closed was a wound in his heart. The fever had claimed another levy, his cough silenced in the night, and Soren whispered his name to the stars, a ritual that kept him whole. Mara was his shadow, her hands learning to bind wounds, her grief for her son a fuel for her care. "You make this bearable," she told him, her voice soft but strong. Soren's eyes welled but he smiled. "We do it together," he said, his hands guiding hers. The village women, led by Aelith, brought bandages, their hands trembling but eager, their work a rebellion against despair. Lyra's scouts were Varhold's eyes, their feet silent in the snow, their reports a lifeline. She'd seen Brighthaven's camp, their mercenaries sharpening lances, their fires aglow in the dark. She taught Callan and Tom to move like her, their steps light, their eyes sharp. "See everything, say nothing," she told them, her patched cloak flapping. Callan's awe for her grew, his blush hidden in the cold, while Tom's laughter eased her tension. Lyra's past, raids survived, villages lost, made her fierce, but her heart was soft for Thornwick's people. She joined Aelith's women, teaching them to hide grain from Halric's seizures, her cunning a weapon. "We're not just fighting swords," she said, her voice low. "We're fighting hunger." Aelith nodded, her rosary clutched tight, her prayers now for courage as much as safety. Halric's greed was a growing shadow. He seized more grain, leaving children crying in Thornwick's lanes. Alric confronted him in the castle, his voice a growl. "You're killing the men who'll die for you," he said, his sword hand twitching. Halric's sneer was cold, his power backed by Edric's seal. "They're serfs," he said. "They serve." Alric's fists clenched, but he held back, knowing a fight would doom the village. Instead he rallied the levies, teaching them to lock shields tighter, their spears a wall. He began hiding food in the forest, using Lyra's tricks, his hands raw from digging. Callan helped, his banner set aside, his heart pounding with the risk. "This is war too," Alric told him, his eyes hard but proud. Mara's courage grew, her hands bandaging and baking, her grief a fire that warmed others. She organized the women, their nets and bandages a lifeline, their whispers a rebellion. A new ally joined them, a levy named Torrin, whose brother had died at Thornridge, his eyes haunted, but his hands strong. Torrin brought spears he'd carved, their tips sharp, and joined Elric's drills, his strength a pillar. "I fight for him," he told Mara, his voice rough. Mara nodded, her hand on his arm, her heart finding kinship in his loss. She began teaching the women to wield staffs, their movements clumsy but fierce, a defiance of Halric's cruelty. Siren watched, his heart full, his salves a gift to their resolve. Tom, Callan's friend, was a spark in the camp, his quick wit easing the levy's fear. He'd lost his brother at Thornridge, and the pain drove him to train harder, his crossbow a match for Callan's. He and Callan became brothers in all but blood, their laughter a light in the dark. Tom began carving signals in the trees, a code for Lyra's scouts, his hands steady despite his grief. "We'll make them proud," he told Callan, his voice cracking. Callan nodded, his banner a vow, his heart tied to Tom's. They helped Allard's women, carrying grain to hidden caches, their hands quick despite Halric's patrols. The village was a crucible, its people forged in fear and fire, their fight a song of steel and care. A new threat emerged, a spy in Thornwick, feeding Rorik's scouts. Lyra caught a villager, a boy named Adric, slipping notes to a Brighthaven rider. She brought him to Alric, her eyes blazing. "He's one of ours," she said, her voice low. Alric's face darkened, but he saw the boy's fear, his thin frame trembling. "Why?" he asked, his voice steady. Alric, tears falling, confessed Halric had threatened his mother, promising food for betrayal. Alric spared him, sending him to Soren's tent, his mercy a risk. Soren tended him, his hands gentle, his words a balm. "You're not alone," he said, his eyes kind. Alric's shame was a weight, but he began helping, his hands carrying bandages, his heart seeking redemption. The fever struck harder, claiming a woman in Allard's group, her cough a warning. Soren and Aliza worked through the night, their salves saving some, but the losses cut deep. Mara held the woman's hand, her tears falling, her grief a mirror of Thornwick's. Alric prayed, her rosary a lifeline, her voice rallying the women. Lyra scouted, her reports grim. Rorik's army was moving, their mercenaries a tide of steel. Alric adjusted his plans, his archers hidden deeper, his spearmen ready. Callan and Tom trained, their crossbows a threat, their banners high. Torrin carved more spears, his hands bloody but sure. The village prepared, their hands busy, their spirits fears. Alric's cruelty escalated. He burned a hut, claiming it hid grain, its family cast into the snow. Alric, Luic, their voice a storm. "We won't break," she said, her hands linking theirs. Mara and Torrin hid more food, their caches a defiance. Soren and Eliza Warwick tended the family, their salves a comfort. Lyra's scouts watched Halric, their signals a warning. Alric planned a raid on Halric's stores, a desperate move to feed the village. Callan and Tom joined, their crossbows ready, their fear a fire. The raid succeeded, grain hidden in the forest, but a guard's arrow grazed Tom, his cry a wound in Callan's heart. Soren stitched him, his hands steady, his voice a promise. "You'll fight again," he said,
his eyes warm. The ford's battle loomed, Bright Haven's banners a shadow in the snow. Alric, Callan, Soren, Lyra, Mara, Alric, the fallen Torin and Aliza stood together, their bond a shield. The village prayed, their hands linked, their hearts with the men on the ford. Alric's archers waited, their bows taut. Callan's banner flew, his resolve aflame. Soren's tent was ready, its herbs a defiance. Lyra's scouts moved, their whispers a weapon. Mara and Aliza wove their nets a trap. Torin's spears gleamed, his strength a vow. Tom's signals guided, his wound a badge. Alric, his hands healed, her lessons a light. Their story was a thread in Varushold's tapestry, a tale of steel and sacrifice, weaving toward a battle that would test their souls, their fighters.
The river ford glittered under a fragile dawn, its icy waters a mirror for the tension gripping Varhold. Ulrich, Callan, Soren, Lyra, Mara, Aelith, Tom, Torrin, and Alira stood as the soul of Thornwick's resistance, their hands ready, their hearts forged in the fire of loss and defiance. Brighthaven's banners loomed across the river, their mercenaries' lances a forest of steel, Lord Rorik's cunning a shadow over the ford. Ulrich's burning of a villager's hut had sparked fury, and the fever's relentless grip claimed lives, despite Soren's salves and Alira's tease. Edric, the young spy, worked to redeem himself, his hands carrying bandages, his shame a weight. The raid on Ulrich's stores had fed the village, but Tom's wound was a fresh scar, a reminder of the cost. Their story was a tapestry of steel and sacrifice, its threads taut with the promise of battle, weaving a tale that would either break them or bind them tighter. Ulrich stood on the cliffs above the ford, his chainmail heavy, his scarred hands tracing the new plan. Rorik's knowledge of their defenses, thanks to Gavin's betrayal, meant Brighthaven would strike at dusk, using the fog to mask their advance. Ulrich hid archers deeper in the trees, their longbows a silent vow, and placed spearmen in the river's shallows, their shields low to surprise the cavalry. Lyra's scouts, nimble and sharp-eyed, marked paths with stones, their signals a whisper in the wind. "We don't just fight," Ulrich told his men, his voice rough but steady. "We outlast them." His eyes lingered on Callan, the boy's banner a beacon, his courage a spark Ulrich hadn't seen in years. "Hold the line," he said, his gruff tone hiding a father's pride. Callan's hands gripped the banner, his arm still sore from the arrow at Thornridge. Tom's fresh wound a mirror of his fear. Ulrich's training was a forge, hours with the crossbow, its bolts heavy but true, and drills with the mace, its weight a test of his will. Callan's heart was his strength. He shared his cloak with Tom, their laughter a light in the camp's gloom. At night, he sought Soren's tent, his voice trembling. "What if I'm not enough?" he asked, his green eyes shadowed. Soren, stitching a levy's wound, met his gaze. "You're enough for those who need you," he said, his hands steady. Callan thought of Aelith, her prayers a shield, and Tom, his brother in spirit, and nodded, his fear a flame he'd learned to wield. Soren's tent was a sanctuary, its air thick with the scent of chamomile and blood. Alira's lessons were a heartbeat: prioritize the living, ease the dying, keep moving. Soren's hands were raw from work, his heart heavy with the names he whispered to the stars. The fever had claimed another child, her cough silenced in the night, and Soren's tears fell as he wrapped her in Mara's woven cloth. Mara was his pillar, her hands bandaging with a precision born of grief, her son's loss a fire that warmed others. "You carry us," she told him, her voice soft but fierce. Soren's smile was faint, his eyes wet. "We carry each other," he said, his hands guiding hers. Aelith's women joined them, their bandages a lifeline, their hands trembling but eager, their work a defiance of death's shadow. Lyra's scouts were Varhold's pulse, their feet silent in the snow, their eyes catching the glint of Brighthaven's campfires. She taught Kaelin and Tom to signal with mirrors, their flashes a code in the dusk. Move like the wind, she told them, her patched cloak a banner of survival. Lyra's past, villages burned, kin lost, made her fierce, but her heart softened for Thornwick's people. She joined Aelith's women, hiding grain in caches, her cunning a shield against Hulrich's greed. Aelith, her rosary clutched tight, rallied the village, her voice a storm. We feed our own, she said, her hands linking theirs. Lyra's laughter was a spark, her bond with Kaelin and Tom a quiet strength, their trust a weapon in the dark. Hulrich's cruelty was a growing storm. After the raid he doubled his patrols, their whips cracking in the square. He seized a tanner's grain, leaving his children crying, their hunger a wound. Alaric confronted him, his voice a growl. You're breaking the men who'll die for Varhold, he said, his sword hand twitching. Hulrich's sneer was ice, their fodder, he said, his power a blade. Alaric's restraint was a battle, his heart with the village. He began hiding food in the cliffs, Lyra's stones marking the caches. Kaelin and Tom helped, their hands quick, despite the cold, their crossbows ready. This is our fight too, Kaelin said, his banner a vow. Alaric's nod was a gift, his pride a warmth in the snow. Tauren the levy was a tower of strength, his spears a forest of defiance. His brother's death at Thornridge drove him, his hands carving wood with a fury that matched the winter's bite. He trained with Ulrich, his spears a match for knights, his eyes haunted but fierce. Mura's kindness softened him, her bandages a comfort for his wounds. You're not alone, she told him, her hand on his arm. Tauren's smile was rare, his voice rough. I fight for him, he said, his brother's name a vow. He began teaching the levies to wield staffs, their movements clumsy but eager, their courage a spark. Tauren watched, his salves a gift, his heart full of their resolve. Edric, the young spy, was a shadow seeking light. His betrayal had been born of fear, but Sauron's mercy gave him purpose. He worked in the tent, his hands carrying bandages, his eyes downcast but determined. I'll make it right, he told Sauron, his voice trembling. Sauron nodded, his hands gentle. You already are, he said, his eyes kind. Edric began helping Aleth's women, his hands hiding grain, his shame a fuel. The village watched, some wary, others warming to his effort. Tom, ever quick, befriended him, his laughter a bridge. You're one of us now, Tom said, his crossbow slung over his shoulder. Edric's nod was a vow, his hands steady, despite his past. A new ally emerged, a bard named Corin, whose lute and tales had travelled Varhold's borders. He came to Thornwick, his cloak patched, but his voice rich, drawn by stories of their fight. Corin sang of battles won, of knights and levies who defied death, his songs a fire in the village's heart. You're more than swords, he told Ulrich, his eyes twinkling. Alaric's gruff laugh hid his gratitude, but he welcomed Corin, his tales rallying the levies. Corin taught Callan and Tom to sing, their voices a light in the camp. Edric's women joined, their songs a prayer for courage. Sauron listened, his heart lifted, his salves a rhythm to Corin's lute. Mur and Tauren sang, their grief softened by hope. Lyra's laughter joined, her scouts inspired. The fever struck again, claiming a levy's daughter, her breath fading in Sauron's arms. Edric worked beside him, her hands steady, but her eyes wet. We can't save them all, she said, her voice breaking. Sauron nodded, his tears falling, his hands stitching another wound. Edric prayed her rosary, a lifeline, her voice rallying the women. Mur and Tauren brought wood for the tent, their hands bloody but sure. Edric carried water, his redemption a quiet strength. Corin sang for the lost, his lute a lament. The village mourned, but their fight grew fiercer, their bandages a defiance, their caches a vow. Edric's wrath was a blizzard. He burned another hut, its family cast into the snow. Edric spied, the fold obliged, the village her voice a beacon. We won't bow, she said, her hands linking theirs. Lyra's scouts caught a patrol, their signals saving a cache. Alaric planned another raid, targeting Halric's wagons, their grain a lifeline. Callan and Tom joined, their crossbows a threat, their fear a fire. Tauren's spears guarded them, his strength a shield. Mur and Alaric spied, their hands flying. Sauron and Celia prepared, their salves ready. Edric scouted,
his eyes sharp. Corin sang, his lute the raid succeeded, grain hidden in the cliffs, but a guard's blade cut Edric's arm, his cry a wound in their hearts. Bright Haven's army neared, their lances a shadow in the fog. Alaric, Callan, Sorin, Lyra, Murra, Edric and Corin stood together, their bond a fortress. The ford was their battleground, its waters a test. Alaric's archers hid, their bars taut. Callan's banner flew, his resolves aflame. Sorin's tent was ready, its herbs a defiance. Lyra's scouts signaled, their whispers a weapon. Murran's Selith's nets waited, their hands steady. Taurin's spears gleamed, his strength a vow. Taurin's signals guided, his wound a badge. Edric's ends healed, her lessons a light. Edric's effort was a redemption, his heart fierce. Corin's lute sang, his tales a spark. Their story was a thread, in Val's tapestry, a tale of steel and sacrifice, weaving toward a battle that would shape their souls, their fight a fire, in the dark.
The fog over the river ford was a shroud cloaking Varhold in a tense hush as the dawn broke cold and grey. Alric, Callan, Sorin, Lyra, Mara, Alith, Tom, Torrin, Alira, Edric, and Corin stood as the heart of Thornwick's defiance, their hands steady, their spirits forged in the crucible of war and loss. Brighthaven's army loomed across the water, their lances gleaming through the mist. Lord Rorik's cunning a blade poised to strike. Alec's burning of huts had fueled the village's fury, and the fever's shadow lingered, claiming lives despite Sorin's salves and Alira's tease. Alec's wound from the raid was a fresh scar, his redemption a fragile thread, while Corin's lute wove hope into the dark. Their story was a tapestry of steel and sacrifice, its final threads weaving a tale of courage and love that would either break them or make them eternal. A song of survival that would echo beyond the ford. Alec stood at the ford's edge, his chainmail heavy, his scarred hands gripping his sword. Rorik's army would strike soon, their numbers swollen with mercenaries, their knowledge of Varhold's defences, a wound from Gavin's betrayal. Alec's plan was a desperate gamble, archers hidden in the trees, spearmen in the reeds, nets woven by Alet's women to slow the cavalry. Lyra's scouts signalled from the cliffs, their mirrors flashing warnings. "We fight for Thornwick," Alec told his men, his voice rough but resolute. "Not just for Edric, but for every soul waiting behind us." His eyes found Callan, the boy's banner high despite his trembling hands, and saw a knight in the making. "You're my strength," Alec said, his gruff tone soft with pride, and Callan's nod was a vow. Callan clutched the banner, its blue and gold a beacon in the fog, his arm still sore from Thornridge. Tom's wound a mirror of his fear. Alec's training had forged him. Crossbow bolts flew true, his mace a steady weight, but his heart was his true weapon. He shared his cloak with Tom, their laughter a spark in the camp's gloom, and carried water for the levies, their gratitude a warmth. At night, he sought Sorin's tent, his voice low. "I'm scared I'll fail them," he admitted, his green eyes shadowed. Sorin, mixing herbs, met his gaze. "You're carrying their hope," he said, his hands steady. "That's enough." Callan thought of Alet's her prayers a shield, and Tom his brother in spirit, and stood taller, his fear a fire he'd wield. Sorin's tent was a haven, its air thick with the tang of poppy and blood. Elytra's lessons were a pulse. Stitch fast, save the living, honor the dying. Sorin's hands were raw, his heart heavy with the names he whispered to the stars. The fever had taken another levy, his breath fading in Mara's arms, and Soren's tears fell as he wrapped him in her woven cloth. Mara was his anchor, her hands bandaging with a precision born of grief, her son's loss a flame that warmed others. "You keep us whole," she told him, her voice fierce. Soren's smile was faint, his eyes wet. "We do it together," he said, his hands guiding hers. Alet's women brought bandages, their hands trembling but eager, their work a defiance of death's grip. Lyra's scouts were Varhold's eyes, their signals a lifeline in the fog. She'd seen Rorik's camp, their fires aglow, their lances sharp. She taught Callan and Tom to move silently, their mirrors flashing codes. "You're my shadows," she told them, her patched cloak a banner. Lyra's past, villages lost, kin buried, made her fierce, but her heart softened for Thornwick. She helped Alet's hide grain, her cunning a shield against Halleck's greed. Alet's her rosary clutched, rallied the village, her voice a storm. "We're their strength," she said, her hands linking theirs. Lyra's laughter was a spark, her bond with Callan and Tom a quiet vow, their trust a weapon in the mist. Halleck's cruelty was a growing shadow. After the raid he burned another hut, its family cast into the snow. Alet's confronted him in the square, her voice a blade. "You starve the men who fight," she said, her eyes blazing. Halleck's sneer was cold, his power a whip. "They're nothing," he said. Alet's women rallied, their nets and bandages a rebellion. Alex furious, hid more grain, his hands raw from digging. Callan and Told, their crossbows ready, their fear a fire. Torrin carved spears, his hands bloody but sure, his brother's loss a fuel. "We fight for them," he told Mara, his voice rough. Mara nodded, her bandages a comfort, her heart tied to his. Eletrid's redemption was a fragile light. His wounds slowed him, but he worked in Soren's tent, his hands carrying bandages, his eyes downcast but determined. "I'll earn your trust," he told Ulrich, his voice trembling. Eletrid's nod was stern but kind. "You're earning it," he said, his eyes sharp. Eletrid's helped Alet's women, hiding grain, his shame a spark. Tom, his friend, shared his rations, his laughter a bridge. "You're one of us," Tom said, his crossbow slung over his shoulder. Eletrid's smile was faint, his hands steady, his heart seeking forgiveness in every bandage he tied. Corrin's lute was a beacon, his songs weaving courage into the camp. He sang of knights who defied death, of villages that stood tall, his voice a fire in the cold. "You're more than steel," he told Ulrich, his eyes twinkling. Eletrid's gruff laugh hid his gratitude, but he welcomed Corrin's tales, their rhythm rallying the levies. Callan and Tom sang, their voices alight. Eletrid's women joined, their songs a prayer. Soren listened, his heart lifted, his salves a rhythm to Corrin's lute. Mara and Torrin sang, their grief softened. Lyra's laughter joined, her scouts inspired. Eletrid's hummed, his redemption a note in their song. The battle began at dusk, the fog a veil as Brighthaven's cavalry charged, their lances gleaming. Eletrid's archers loosed arrows, a rain of death that broke the charge. Horses screaming, men falling. The spearmen in the reeds rose, their shields a wall, their spears thrusting. Rochard's infantry pressed, their axes hacking, but Ulrich's knights held, their wedge a blade through the enemy line. Callan's banner flew, his voice shouting Ulrich's name, his fear swallowed by duty. An arrow grazed his leg, but he stood firm, his heart aflame. Soren and Alira worked below, their tent a storm of blood and herbs, their hands stitching wounds, their voices soothing the dying. The battle turned when Lyra's scouts signaled a flank, their mirrors flashing. Eletrid's Daten's knights charging, Eletrid's nets tangling the cavalry. Torrin's spears pierced mail, his strength a vow. Tom's crossbow felled a mercenary, his wound a badge of courage. Eletrid's carried the wounded, his hands bloody but sure, his redemption a light. Corrin sang, his lute a chord through the chaos. But the cost was brutal. Levies fell, their spears broken, their names a weight. Mara bandaged, her tears falling, her grief a fuel. Eletrid's prayed, her rosary a lifeline, her voice rallying the women. The ford held, but Rurik's army retreated, their banners fading, leaving Varhold's victory a bloody thing. In the aftermath, Thornwick wept, its lanes filled with mourning. Eletrid's walked among the wounded, his sword heavy,
his eyes haunted. Callan, his leg bandaged, helped Soren, his hands trembling, but his heart full. Soren stitched, his voice a balm, his tears falling, for a levy who died in his arms. Lyra scouted, her eyes sharp for stragglers, her heart with the village. Mara and Alirath wove, their nets now bandages, their hands linked. Torrin carried the fallen, his spears a tribute. Tom sang, his voice cracking, his crossbow set aside. Elatrix worked, his redemption a vow. Corin's lute was silent, his tales now of loss. Elatrix's greed broke, the villagers' defiance fueled by the battle's cost, turned on him. Elatrix's greed, the villagers' defiance, fueled by the battle's cost, turned on him. Elatrix led the women, their voices a storm, demanding grain. Elatrix backed him, his sword a threat. Elatrix cornered, fled, his power shattered. King Edric, shaken by the battle, eased the taxes, his throne steadied by Alric's The fever faded, Soren's salves and Alira's teaser shield. Thornwick rebuilt, its lanes alive with purpose. Elatrix trained new levies, his scars a map of survival. Callan carried the banner, his heart a knight's. Soren healed, his hands a gift. Lyra scouted, her laughter a spark. Mara and Alirath wove, their tapestry a vow. Torrin forged, his spears a legacy. Tom sang, his voice a light. Elatrix worked, his redemption complete. Corin's lute played, his tales eternal. As spring broke, Varhold bloomed, its ford a symbol of their stand. Elatrix Callan, Soren, Lyra Mara, Elatrix Tom, Torrin Alira, and Alirath stood together, their bond a fortress. Corin sang, their story, a song of steel and sacrifice, of hands that fought and healed, of hearts that refused to break. Thornwick was no longer just a village, it was a beacon, its people bound by love and loss, their fight a flame that burned through the fog. Their story wasn't just of battles won, but of lives woven together, a tapestry of courage that would echo through Varhold's hills, a truth about war that wasn't just steel, but the heart that wielded it, a song that would never fade.